Imagine a world where health is not just a physical state, but a profound reflection of our connection to the universe, where illness is not a coincidence, but a sign, a hidden message waiting to be deciphered. In this mysterious and fascinating journey, we will explore the teachings left by Max Heindel, a great thinker of Theosophy, about the delicate balance between the body, mind, and spirit. The Theosophical Keys to Health and Disease invites us to delve into the secrets that have been passed down through the ages, revealing ancient truths that challenge our modern understanding. This text not only uncovers the hidden causes of our ailments, but also shows us the path to profound healing beyond the physical, on the spiritual plane. Are you ready to discover knowledge as ancient as humanity itself? Join me in unraveling these mysteries and opening the doors to a new understanding of health and disease. Prepare to change your perspective on life, well-being, and the true purpose of our existence. The keys are here, waiting to be discovered. The hidden secrets of disease and health. Disease has been one of the deepest mysteries of human existence. For some, it is a divine punishment, a trial imposed by higher forces to measure the strength of the soul. For others, it is a natural consequence of biology and evolution. But at the heart of the oldest traditions, in forbidden esoteric texts, in Gnostic wisdom, and in the hidden writings of great initiates, we find a truth that modern science is only beginning to glimpse. Disease is not an accident, but a reflection of the energy that dwells within the human being, the result of invisible laws that govern the body, mind, and spirit. Diseases are not merely physical alterations, but symptoms of a deeper disharmony. Every illness has a hidden cause. In this text, we will delve into the spiritual, karmic, and hereditary roots of disease, exploring its relationship with the destiny of the soul, lifestyle habits, and external influences that surround us. Through Theosophy, Gnosis, mystical writings, and forbidden texts, we will unravel the mysteries of health and disease from a perspective that goes beyond the material realm. The spiritual roots of disease, a punishment or a test. Since ancient times, disease has been considered to have a hidden meaning beyond the physical deterioration of the body. In the Bible, for example, we find multiple references to disease as a result of transgressing divine laws. If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight, if you pay attention to his commandments and keep all his statutes, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on Egypt, for I am the Lord who heals you. Exodus 3:26. This passage not only mentions the possibility of avoiding disease through obedience to certain laws, but also hints at the existence of a hidden balance between the purity of the soul and the manifestation of health in the body. In Gnostic texts, disease is seen as the result of a separation between the spirit and its divine source, a disconnection that generates disharmony in the subtle bodies before manifesting in the flesh. The Gospel of Thomas, one of the most enigmatic texts of early Gnosticism, states, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Here we find a crucial key to understanding disease. What is unexpressed, what is repressed in consciousness, becomes a poison that slowly transforms into a physical ailment. Contained anger, unacknowledged fear, hidden guilt, and unresolved traumas do not disappear on their own. They crystallize in the body, transforming into ailments that seek to be understood. Karma and disease, the body as a mirror of the soul. Theosophy teaches us that every action leaves an imprint on human consciousness. This imprint, known as karma, not only manifests in external life events, but also in the body. From this perspective, disease is not a punishment but an inevitable consequence of past actions, whether from this life or previous ones. The Tibetan master Djwhal Khul states in his occult writings, "Every disease originates in the mind and desires of man. The bodies are impregnated with the energies of past thoughts and emotions, and these energies determine the quality of health in the present." This leads us to ask, what diseases are we generating with our way of thinking? What lifestyle habits are reflections of mental states that we have not yet healed? The ancient Egyptians believed that disease was the result of a disharmony between the Ka, astral body, and the Ba, spirit, and that only by restoring this balance through sacred rituals and spiritual practices could health be recovered. Although dressed in archaic symbols, this idea has parallels with modern medicine, which is beginning to recognize the relationship between emotional stress, anxiety, and the development of chronic illnesses. Heredity and disease, is our biological destiny unchangeable? One of the most fascinating topics in this text is the exploration of genetic inheritance and its relationship with disease from an esoteric perspective. Modern genetics tells us that we inherit predispositions to certain diseases through our DNA. However, spiritual traditions have taught for centuries that we do not only inherit physical characteristics, but also patterns of energy and vibration that influence our health. In the esoteric medical records of Paracelsus, we find the following statement: "It is not the blood that transmits disease, but the vibration of consciousness that permeates matter." From this perspective, hereditary disease is not merely a biological issue, but the result of energetic tendencies transmitted from generation to generation. Could it be possible that a hereditary disease is not inevitable if the energetic pattern that sustains it is transformed? The impact of alcohol and tobacco, instruments of darkness. The consumption of substances like alcohol and tobacco has been normalized in modern society, but in esoteric texts, it is clearly warned that these substances weaken the connection between the soul and the body, opening doors to low-vibration energies. The Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah, states, "Intoxicated flesh closes the gates of understanding, and the soul remains in shadows." The effects of alcohol on consciousness have been studied not only from conventional medicine, but also from the perspective of initiatic traditions. In many occult orders, alcohol has been seen as a substance that dissolves the bonds of the etheric body, allowing external forces to influence the individual's will. Tobacco, on the other hand, has been associated with the crystallization of repetitive thoughts and the interruption of vital energy flow. In the writings of Rudolf Steiner, founder of Anthroposophy, it is stated that tobacco smoke interferes with the connection between the astral body and the physical body, making spiritual perception more difficult. A call for transformation. This text is not merely a theoretical exploration of the causes of disease, but a call for transformation. Understanding disease from its root gives us the power to change our relationship with health, take responsibility for our well-being, and recognize that every ailment is an opportunity to heal on a deeper level. Each chapter will take us on a journey to discover a piece of the puzzle of health and disease, revealing knowledge that has been hidden, forgotten, or distorted over time. If disease is the language of the soul, then this text is an attempt to decipher its message. What we are about to explore may change not only our view of the body, but our perception of life itself. Are you ready to transform your life? Chapter 1: General Causes of Diseases. Introduction. Disease is truly a fire, an invisible fire that is the Father, striving to break the crystallized conditions we have gathered in our bodies. We recognize fever as a fire, but tumors, cancers, and all other ailments are also the effects of that invisible fire, working to purify the system and free it from the conditions we have created by breaking the laws of nature. We can also say that disease is a manifestation of ignorance, the only sin, and healing is a demonstration of applied knowledge, which is the only salvation. Christ is an incarnation of the principle of wisdom, and to the extent that Christ is formed within us, we attain health. Therefore, the healer must be spiritual and strive to instill in their patient elevated ideals so that we may eventually learn to align ourselves with the laws of God that govern the universe, thereby achieving permanent health both in future lives and in the present. The Old Testament begins with the account of how man was led astray by the false light of the Luciferian spirits, giving rise to all the pain and suffering in the world. It ends with the promise that the Sun of Righteousness will arise with healing in its wings. In the New Testament, we find that the Sun of Righteousness, the true light, comes to save the world, and the first fact asserted about him is that he is of immaculate conception. Now, this point must be well understood. It is the Luciferian stain of passion that has brought pain, sin, and suffering into the world. When the creative power is used for the gratification of the senses, whether in solitary vice or in association with or without legal marriage, that is the sin that cannot be forgiven but must be atoned for. Humanity as a whole now suffers for that sin. The weakened bodies, The diseases we see around us have been caused by centuries of abuse, and until we learn to master our passions, there can be no true health among the human race. Before the impregnation of the desire body with this demonic principle, conception was immaculate and a sacrament. Men then walked in the presence of pure angels without shame. The act of fertilization was as chaste as that of a flower. Therefore, when evil was committed, the messenger or angel immediately clothed them with leaves to imprint upon them the ideal they must learn to live by, that of the plant. Whenever we are able to perform the act of generation in a pure, chaste, and passionless manner, as the plant does, immaculate conception occurs, and a Christ is born, one capable of healing all the sufferings of humanity, of conquering death, and of establishing immortality, a true light to lead humanity away from the willfulness of passion through self-sacrifice to compassion. This, then, is the great ideal for which we strive, to cleanse ourselves of the stain of selfishness. That is why we regard the emblem of the Rosicrucian as an ideal. The 7 red roses symbolize purified blood, the white rose signifies the purity of life, and the radiant golden star represents the invaluable influence of health, assistance, and spiritual elevation that every servant of humanity radiates. Until the life of Christ illuminates us from within, we neither understand nor follow the laws of nature, and consequently, we contract diseases due to our ignorant violation of these laws. As Emerson said, "A man who is sick is a scoundrel in the act of being found out. He has broken the laws of nature." Therefore, it is necessary to preach the gospel of Christ, so that each of us learns to love God with all our heart and soul, and our brother as ourselves. For all our problems in the world, whether we recognize it or not, stem from our selfishness. If the function of nutrition is altered, what is the reason? Have we not overloaded our system? Have we not exhausted our nervous energy in anger, trying to force someone to serve our selfish ends, and felt resentment when we failed? In all cases, selfishness is the primary cause of most diseases. Selfishness is the supreme sin that afflicts humanity, rooted in ignorance. Causes of mental disabilities. The disabilities that afflict humanity can be divided into 2 major classes, mental and physical. Mental conditions, when congenital, are particularly attributable to the abuse of the creative function, except in one specific case that we will discuss later. The same applies to speech impairments. This is logical and easy to understand. The brain and larynx were built using half of the creative force by the angels. Previously, man was bisexual and capable of creating on his own, but he lost that ability when these organs were formed. Now he depends on the cooperation of another of the opposite polarity, or sex, to generate a new vehicle for an incoming spirit. When we use spiritual sight to observe man in the memory of nature during the time when he was still being formed, we find that wherever there is now a nerve, there was first a current of desire. The brain itself was initially composed of desire substance, as was the larynx. It was desire that first sent a motor impulse through the brain, creating these nerve currents so that the body could move and obtain whatever gratification the spirit sought. Speech is also used to achieve a desired object or goal. Through these faculties, man has gained a certain mastery over the world, and if he could simply move from one body to another at will, there would be no end to the abuse of his power in satisfying every whim and desire. But by virtue of the law of consequence, an individual carries with them into a new body faculties and organs similar to those they had in their previous one. When passion has destroyed the body in one life, this imprint is stamped onto the seed atom. Therefore, in the next descent into rebirth, it becomes impossible for them to gather healthy material with which to construct a stable brain. In such cases, they are often born under one of the common signs, and usually, all 4 common signs are in the angles, because these signs make it difficult for passionate desire to express itself. As a result, the powerful impulse that once governed their brain and could have been used for the purpose of rejuvenation is now absent. They lack motivation in life, and thus become powerless, a mere driftwood in the ocean of existence, often mad. Yet the spirit itself is not mad. It sees, knows, and intensely desires to use the body, though that is an impossibility. Often it cannot even send a proper impulse along the nerves, so the muscles of the face and body do not respond to its will. This explains the lack of coordination that makes a maniac such a pitiful sight. Thus, the spirit learns one of life's hardest lessons, that being bound to a living body while unable to express oneself through it is worse than death. The desire force necessary for thought, speech, and movement was exhausted in an improper life in the past, leaving the spirit without the energy needed to operate its current physical instrument. Although mental disabilities, when congenital, are generally attributed to the misuse of the creative function in a past life, there is at least one notable exception to this rule. When a spirit faces an especially difficult life ahead, and upon descending into rebirth perceives that the life panorama shown to them marks an existence too harsh to endure, they may sometimes attempt to escape the school of life. At that moment, however, the recording angels or their agents have already established the connection between the vital body and the sensory centers of the forming fetus's brain. Therefore, the spirit's effort to escape the maternal womb is thwarted, but the violent struggle of the ego distorts the connection between the etheric and physical sensory centers, causing the vital body to be misaligned with the physical one. The etheric head extends beyond the physical skull, making it impossible for the spirit to utilize the dense vehicle. The result is that the spirit is bound to a mindless body it cannot use, and the incarnation is practically wasted. There are also cases where a great shock later in life causes the spirit to attempt to flee with its invisible vehicles. As a result, the etheric sensory centers of the brain experience a similar jolt, and the mental faculties become impaired. Almost everyone has likely felt a similar sensation when startled, a surge, as if something were trying to leave the dense body. This is because the desire and vital bodies, being extremely swift in action, compared to which an express train is like a snail, sense the danger and react before the fright is transmitted to the sluggish, inert physical body to which they are anchored. This prevents an ordinary escape attempt. However, in some cases, as mentioned, the fright or shock is severe enough to jolt the etheric sensory centers out of alignment, causing mental derangement. This happens most frequently to people born under common signs, which are the weakest in the zodiac. If, however, like a stretched and torn ligament that gradually regains some elasticity, these centers can recover over time, then mental faculties can be restored more easily than in cases of congenital insanity brought from past lives, where improper connections were formed at birth. Causes of physical disabilities. Regarding physical abnormalities and deformities, the rule seems to be that just as physical indulgence affects the mental state, the abuse of mental powers in one life leads to physical incapacity in future existences. An occult maxim states, "A lie is as much a murder as it is a suicide in the world of desire." The teachings of the Elder Brothers, as given in the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, explain that whenever an event occurs, a specific thought form is generated in the invisible world, recording the incident. Each time the event is spoken about or discussed, a new thought form is created, joining the original and reinforcing it, provided both remain in the same vibrational truth. However, if a false account is given of what happened, the vibrations of the original and the false reproduction do not match. They clash and shatter each other. If the good and truthful thought form is strong enough, it will overcome and break apart the thought forms based on lies, and thus truth will triumph over falsehood. But where lies and malicious thoughts are stronger, they may overpower the truthful thought form of the event and destroy it. Later, these false thought forms will also clash among themselves and ultimately be annihilated. In the end, all things work together for good. Thus, a person who lives a pure life, striving to obey the laws of God and earnestly seeking truth and righteousness, will create thought forms around them of a corresponding nature. Their mind will run along grooves that harmonize with truth, and when the time comes in the second heaven to create the archetype for their next life, they will instinctively align with the forces of righteousness and truth. The patterns incorporated into their body will create harmony in their future vehicles, and health will be their natural state in the coming life. On the other hand, those who in their past life adopted a distorted view of things, disregarded truth, and exercised extreme cunning, selfishness, and indifference to the welfare of others are destined in the second heaven to perceive reality in a similarly distorted manner, for that is their habitual line of thought. Consequently, the archetype they build will embody lines of error and falsehood, and when their body is brought to birth it will exhibit weaknesses, either in various organs or throughout the entire organism. Once again, we caution students not to draw hasty conclusions from these provisional rules. It is not our intention to suggest that everyone with a seemingly healthy body was a paragon of virtue in a past life, nor that those suffering from disabilities were all wicked or worthless individuals. None of us at present are capable of knowing the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We deceive ourselves because our senses are illusory. A long street appears to narrow in the distance when, in reality, it is just as wide a mile away as it is where we stand. The sun and the moon seem much larger when near the horizon than when at the zenith, but we know for a fact that they do not gain in size as they descend toward the horizon, nor lose it as they ascend to the middle of the sky. In this way, we are constantly making adjustments and correcting the illusions of the senses. The same applies to everything else in the world. What seems to be true is not always so, and what is true today regarding life's conditions may change tomorrow. Therefore, it is impossible to know the ultimate truth under the fleeting and illusory conditions of physical existence. Only when we enter the higher realms, particularly the region of concrete thought, do we perceive eternal truths. Thus we must necessarily err again and again, despite our most sincere efforts to know and always speak the truth. That is why it is impossible to construct a completely harmonious vehicle. If that were possible, such a body would indeed be immortal, and we know that immortality in the flesh is not God's design. Paul says that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. But even today, only a very small percentage of people are willing to live as close to the truth as they perceive it, to confess and profess it before others through service and a righteous, harmless life. We can understand that such individuals must have been few and far between in past times when humanity had not yet evolved the altruism that came to this planet with the advent of our Lord and Savior, Christ Jesus. Standards of morality were much lower then, and the love of truth was almost insignificant among the majority of humankind, who were absorbed in their efforts to amass wealth, gain power, or achieve prestige for themselves. They were naturally inclined to disregard the interests of others, and telling a lie did not seem reprehensible at all. Sometimes it even seemed commendable. The archetypes were constantly filled with weaknesses, and the organic functions of the body today are seriously affected as a result, especially as Western bodies become more nervous and increasingly sensitive to pain due to the growing awareness of the spirit. Chapter 2. Specific Causes of Disease. Insanity. From the occultist's perspective, there are 4 types of madness. Insanity is always caused by a break in the chain of vehicles connecting the ego to the physical body. This break may occur between the brain centers and the vital body, between the vital body and the desire body, between the desire body and the mind, or between the mind and the ego. The rupture may be complete or only partial. When the break occurs between the brain centers and the vital body, or between the vital body and the desire body, we have cases of idiocy. When the rupture is between the desire body and the mind, the impulsive and violent desire body dominates, resulting in maniacal insanity. When the break is between the ego and the mind rules over the other vehicles, and we have the cunning maniac who can deceive their guardian into believing they are completely harmless, until they have devised some cunning and diabolical plan, at which point they may suddenly reveal their deranged mentality and cause a terrible catastrophe. There is one cause of insanity that is worth explaining, as it is sometimes possible to prevent it. When the ego is returning from the invisible world to reincarnate, it is shown the various available incarnations. It sees the coming life with its major events as a moving picture passing before its vision. It is given the opportunity to choose from several lives. At that moment, it perceives the lessons it must learn, the destiny it has generated for itself in past lives, and which part of that destiny must be worked through in each of the incarnations offered. It then makes its choice and is guided by the agents of the recording angels toward the country and family where it will live its next life. This panoramic vision occurs in the third heaven, where the ego is stripped of all material considerations and feels spiritually elevated. It is much wiser then than it appears here on earth, where it is blinded by the flesh to an inconceivable degree. Later, after conception has taken place, the ego enters the mother's womb around the 18th day after that event. There, it comes into contact with the etheric mold of its new physical body, which has been formed by the recording angels. To give the brain the structure needed to imprint upon the ego, the tendencies required to work through its destiny. At that moment, the ego once again sees images of its future life, much like a drowning man perceives the images of his past life in an instant. However, by this time, the ego is already partially blinded to its spiritual nature. If the coming life appears harsh, it often hesitates to enter the womb and establish the proper brain connections. It may try to withdraw quickly, and as a result, instead of the vital and dense bodies being concentric as they should be, the vital body, formed of ether, may be partially pulled above the head of the dense body. In this case, the connection between the sensory centers of the vital body and the dense body is disrupted, resulting in congenital idiocy, epilepsy, chorea, St. Vitus's dance, and other nervous disorders. The discordant relationship between the parents is often the last straw that makes the ego feel unable to enter that environment. Therefore, it cannot be emphasized strongly enough to future parents that during the period of gestation, it is of utmost importance to do everything possible to keep the mother in a state of contentment and harmony. This is because passing through the maternal womb is an extremely difficult task for the ego. It tests all its sensitivities to the utmost. Disharmonious conditions in the home into which it is entering are, of course, an additional source of distress, which may result in the terrible state of affairs mentioned earlier. Minor forms of black magic, such as hypnotism, sometimes cause congenital idiocy in a future life. The hypnotist deprives their victims of the free use of their bodies, and by virtue of the law of consequences, they are then bound to a body with a malformed brain, preventing proper expression. However, we should not infer that all cases of congenital idiocy are due to such malpractice by the ego in a past life. There are also other causes that may result in congenital idiocy. Drugs and breathing exercises, such as those used by Eastern aspirants, have a terribly destructive effect on the body and should be considered entirely undesirable. Many men today are either in insane asylums or in the grave from tuberculosis due to the effects of breathing exercises and drugs, which are well known. The atoms of the Western body have been highly sensitized in the normal course of evolution, and exercises that an Eastern person can use without harm, because their body has not been so highly sensitized, cause the atoms of the Western body to become overstimulated. It is extremely difficult to restore them to proper rest once this occurs. When a person becomes a medium for a disembodied spirit, where the spirit enters the body and takes possession of it, as in trance mediumship, there is little or no harm, as long as the controlling spirit does not abuse its privilege. In fact, there are cases where the controlling spirit has a better understanding of how to care for the body than its original owner, sometimes even improving its health. However, spirits of high ethical nature rarely control a medium. Instead, earthbound and low-level spirits, such as Native American spirits and others of similar nature, are the ones who take control of mediums. They may use the medium's body to gratify their base desires for alcohol and sex, causing disturbances in the system and a deterioration of the physical body. In the case of a materializing medium, the effect is always harmful. The materializing spirit enters the medium and then extracts ether from the vital body through the spleen. The difference between a materializing medium and an ordinary person is that the connection between the vital body and the dense body is extremely loose, allowing the vital body to be largely withdrawn. The vital body is responsible for processing the solar currents that provide vitality. Deprived of this vitalizing principle, the medium's body during materialization shrinks, sometimes to nearly half its usual size. The flesh becomes flaccid, and the spark of life burns very dimly. When the séance ends and the vital body is restored, the medium wakes up in normal consciousness, but experiences a terrible sense of exhaustion. Unfortunately, in some cases, they resort to alcohol to restore their depleted energy. Naturally, this quickly undermines their health, and the medium becomes a complete wreck. In all cases, mediumship should be avoided, as it poses not only this danger to the medium but also other, more subtle risks, particularly in relation to the post-mortem state. Obsession. Obsession is a condition in which a disembodied spirit has taken permanent possession of someone's body after dispossessing its rightful owner. However, some individuals who have developed habits of drunkenness or other vices attempt to excuse themselves by claiming they are possessed. When someone claims to be obsessed, it is almost always an excuse. Just as a thief does not go around announcing their theft in the material world, a truly obsessive entity would not proclaim its possession. Such an entity has no reason to expose itself, as this could lead to its exorcism. There is an infallible method to determine whether a person is truly obsessed: the eye test. The eye is the window of the soul, and only the true owner of the body can contract or dilate the iris, pupil. If we take a person suspected of obsession into a darkened room, we will observe that, if they are truly obsessed, their pupil will not dilate. If we then expose them to sunlight, their pupil will not contract. If we ask them to look at a distant object, their pupil will not expand as it should. If we ask them to read small letters, their pupil will not contract. In short, the pupil of an obsessed person will not respond to light or distance. When a person is obsessed, there also exists a certain illness called locomotor ataxia, in which the iris does not respond to distance, but does react to light. No one who maintains a positive mental attitude can become obsessed, as affirming one's individuality keeps it strong enough to ward off all intruders. However, spiritist seances, where attendees are in a passive and negative state, always pose a great danger. The best way to avoid obsession is to maintain this positive attitude. Anyone who is naturally inclined to negativity should avoid spiritist seances, crystal gazing, and other methods of spirit evocation. This practice is harmful, as those who have passed on have their own work to do in the afterlife and should not be brought back. The process after death. At the moment of death, when the seed atom in the heart, which contains a panoramic record of all past life experiences, breaks, the spirit leaves the physical body, taking with it the more subtle bodies. The spirit then hovers over its now lifeless dense body for a period ranging from a few hours to 3.5 days. The determining factor for the length of this period is the strength of the vital body, which is the soul body mentioned in the Bible. During this time, a panoramic life review occurs, playing in reverse order from death back to birth. These images are imprinted on the desire body through the reflecting ether in the vital body. During this process, the spirit's consciousness is concentrated in the vital body, or at least it should be, and it does not feel anything regarding the matter. The impression left on the desire body serves as the basis for the suffering in purgatory due to past wrongdoings, and for the enjoyment in the first heaven due to past good deeds. Further research over the years has revealed an additional process taking place during these critical days after death. A separation occurs in the vital body, similar to what happens during initiation. The higher part of this vehicle, which may be called the soul, joins the higher bodies and forms the basis of consciousness in the invisible worlds after death. The lower part, which is discarded, returns to the physical body and hovers over the grave in most cases, as mentioned in the Cosmo. This division of the vital body is not the same for everyone. It depends on the nature of the life lived and the character of the deceased. In extreme cases, this separation differs greatly from the norm. This significant point was revealed in many cases of alleged spiritual obsession investigated from headquarters. In fact, it was these cases that led to far-reaching and astonishing discoveries about the nature of obsession suffered by those who sought our help. As expected in such cases, the division of the vital body showed a predominance of negative forces. Efforts were then made to determine whether there was another category of people in whom the division occurred differently, with a preponderance of good. It is a pleasure to confirm that such cases do exist, and by balancing the findings, the following description appears to accurately reflect the conditions and their causes. The vital body's purpose is to build up the physical body, while desires and emotions tend to wear it down. It is this struggle between the vital body and the desire body that creates physical consciousness and gradually hardens the tissues, turning the soft body of a child into the rigid, shrunken body of old age, eventually leading to death. The morality or immorality of our desires and emotions also affects the vital body, when devotion to high ideals is the primary driving force, especially when this has been practiced consistently for years and cultivated through the scientific exercises of retrospection and concentration. The chemical and life ethers in the vital body gradually diminish as animal appetites fade, and the luminous and reflecting ethers increase. The impact on health and death. As a result, physical health tends to be less robust among those who follow the higher path compared to those who indulge in lower nature desires, which attract chemical and life ethers in proportion to the extent and nature of their vices, excluding the higher ethers. This fact leads to several important consequences related to death. Since chemical ether cements the molecules of the body and holds them in place during life, when there is only a minimal amount present, the physical body disintegrates rapidly after death. This phenomenon has not yet been personally verified by the writer, as it is difficult to find highly spiritual individuals who have recently passed away. However, this idea appears supported by the biblical record that Christ's body was not found in the tomb after his resurrection. As previously stated, Christ spiritualized the particles of his body throughout his ministry, which may explain this event. A worldly life increases the proportion of lower ethers in the vital body compared to the higher ones. If someone lives a so-called clean life, avoiding excesses, their health during life is more robust than that of a spiritual aspirant. The latter, due to their spiritual focus, builds a vital body composed mainly of higher ethers, prioritizing the bread of life over physical sustenance. As a result, their physical instrument becomes increasingly sensitive, nervous, and delicate, conditions that are highly favorable to spiritual pursuits but present physical challenges. The struggle for spiritual progress. For the majority of humanity, the preponderance of selfishness and the desire to extract the most out of life, whether by fending off poverty or accumulating possessions and maintaining them, leaves little time or inclination to engage in the soul culture necessary for true success in life. Thus, very little progress is retained from each life, and evolution moves terribly slowly. Until one can observe the moment of death from the higher regions of the concrete thought world, looking downward, it does not appear that anything of the vital body is preserved. This body appears to return completely to the physical body and hover over the grave to disintegrate there simultaneously with the latter. In fact, an increasing part of it adheres to the higher vehicles and goes with them to the world of desires, to serve as a basis for consciousness in purgatorial and celestial lives, generally persisting until the person enters the second heaven and merges with the forces of nature there in their efforts to create a new environment for themselves. At that point, it has been absorbed by the spirit, or nearly so, and whatever material nature remains quickly fades away. However, there are some people who are of such an evil nature that they enjoy a life dedicated to vice and degenerate practices, a brutal life, and delight in causing pain. Sometimes they even cultivate the occult arts for malicious purposes, seeking greater power over their victims. Their diabolical and immoral practices result in the hardening of their vital body. In these extreme cases, where the animal nature has been predominant, and there has been no expression of the soul in the previous earthly life, the division of the vital body mentioned earlier cannot take place at the time of death because there is no dividing line. In such cases, if the vital body were to return to the dense body and gradually disintegrate there, the effect of a very wicked life would not be so far-reaching. Unfortunately, in such instances, there is an intertwining of the vital and desire bodies that prevents their separation. We have seen that when a person primarily lives in their higher nature, their spiritual vehicles are nourished at the expense of the lower ones. Conversely, when their consciousness is centered on the lower vehicles, they strengthen them immeasurably. It must be understood that the life of the desire body does not end with the departure of the spirit. It retains a residual life and consciousness. In ordinary cases, the vital body can also perceive things to a slight degree for a few days after death, hence the suffering caused by embalming, post-mortem examinations, etc., immediately after death. However, when a lowly life has been hardened and has endured with great strength, it has a tenacious grip on life and the ability to feed on the odors of food and liquor. Sometimes, like a parasite, it even manages to vampirize the people with whom it comes into contact. Thus, an evil person can continue to exist for many years, unseen in our environment, but so close that they are nearer than one's own hands and feet. They are far more dangerous than a physical criminal, as they can incite others with similar inclinations to engage in criminal or degenerate practices without fear of detection or punishment by the law. These beings are, therefore, among the greatest imaginable threats to society. They have sent countless victims to prison, broken homes, and caused an incredible amount of unhappiness. They always abandon their victims once they have fallen into the clutches of the law, reveling in their pain and anguish, which is part of their diabolical scheme. It is astonishing when one searches the memory of nature in the past to find how frequent this condition of intertwining desire and vital bodies was in previous millennia. We understand, of course, in an abstract way that the further we go back in human history, the more savage people appear. But that such savagery was so common and so brutal even in relatively recent historical times, where might was the absolute and unquestioned measure of right, was, to say the least, quite shocking to the writer. It has been taught that selfishness and material interests were deliberately fostered under Jehovah's regime to stimulate action. Over time, this hardened the desire body so much that, by the time of Christ's advent, there was almost no heavenly life left among the people of that era. The earthbound spirits mentioned earlier gravitate toward the lower regions of the world of desire, where they align with people on earth who are best suited to assist them in their wicked schemes. They generally remain in this earthbound condition for 50, 60, or even 75 years, but extreme cases have been found where such beings have persisted for centuries. When the spirit departs from the body of sin, as we call it in contrast to the soul body, to ascend to the second heaven, it does not disintegrate as quickly as the ordinary shell left behind by normal people. This is because the consciousness within it is increased due to its dual composition, that is, being made up of both a vital body and a desire body. It retains a remarkable individual or personal consciousness. While it cannot reason, it possesses a low cunning that makes it appear as though it has a true spiritual presence, an ego. This allows it to lead a parasitic existence for many centuries. Meanwhile, the departed spirit enters the second heaven, but having done no spiritual work on earth to desire or deserve a prolonged stay there, or in the third heaven, it remains there only long enough to create a new environment for itself. Then it reincarnates much earlier than usual to satisfy its strong attraction to material things. When the spirit returns to earth, this body of sin is naturally drawn toward it and generally remains with it throughout its life as a kind of demon. Investigations have shown that these soulless creatures were very common during biblical times, and it was these entities that our Savior referred to as demons, being the cause of various obsessions and bodily illnesses recorded in the Bible. In addition to the entities already mentioned, who inhabit a self-made body of sin and thus suffer entirely due to their own actions, there are numerous other cases of spiritual obsession and possession that remain to be explored. During the period of atonement, two classes were found that were similar in certain aspects, although different in others. Besides the divine hierarchies and the four life waves of spirits currently evolving in the physical world through the mineral, plant, animal, and human kingdoms, there are also other life waves that express themselves in various invisible worlds. Among them, there are certain classes of subhuman spirits called elementals. Sometimes one of these elementals takes possession of the body of sin of a member of a savage tribe, thus adding an extra intelligence to that being. When the spirit that generated this body of sin reincarnates, the usual attraction brings them together again. However, because of the elemental that has ennobled the body of sin, the spirit becomes different from the other members of the tribe. We then find these individuals acting as healers or in similar capacities. These elemental spirits, which inhabit the bodies of sin of indigenous people, also act upon mediums as controlling spirits. Having gained power over the medium during their life, when the medium dies, these elemental controls expel them from the vehicles containing their vital experience. As a result, the medium may remain stalled in their evolution for years, as there is no power that can force these spirits to release them once they have taken control of such a body. Therefore, even if mediumship does not appear to cause any negative effects during life, there is a very serious danger after death for anyone who allows another being to take possession of their body. Hysteria, epilepsy, tuberculosis, and cancer. It was discovered that hysteria, epilepsy, tuberculosis, and cancer were the results of erratic tendencies from a past life. Research showed that while many of the subjects had been almost manic in the gratification of their lust in past incarnations, the physical body generated in the present life was normally healthy, and their incapacity was entirely mental. In other cases, where indulgence in passionate nature was combined with a tyrannical character and cruel disregard for others, Epilepsy, rickets, hysteria, and a deformed body were the present results. Cancer, especially of the liver or breast, was often the outcome of such tendencies. However, we must caution students not to draw hasty conclusions, as these conditions are not rigidly fixed. While the number of investigations was large and involved arduous work for a single researcher, they are still too few to be entirely conclusive in matters involving millions of human beings. Nevertheless, the findings align with the teachings of the cosmos given by the Elder Brothers regarding the effects of materialism in causing rickets, a softening of body parts that should be hard, and tuberculosis, a hardening of tissues that should be flexible. Cancer has a similar essential effect. Considering that the zodiac sign Cancer is ruled by the moon, the planet of generation, and that the lunar sphere is under the dominion of Jehovah, the God of generation, whose angels announce and preside over births, as seen in the cases of Isaac, Samuel, John the Baptist, and Jesus, it becomes evident that the abuse of the creative function can lead to both cancer and madness in various forms. Deficiency of vision. Regarding blindness or visual disabilities, it has long been known among researchers that they result from extreme cruelty in a past life. Recent investigations have added new information, revealing that many modern eye problems arise because our eyes are actually changing. They are becoming sensitive to a higher octave of vision, as the ether surrounding the Earth is becoming denser and the air increasingly rarefied. This is particularly true in certain parts of the world, such as Southern California. Notably, the aurora borealis is becoming more frequent and more powerful in its effects on Earth. In the early years of the Christian era, this phenomenon was almost unknown. However, over time, as the Christic wave that descends to Earth each year infuses more and more of its own life into the once dead terrestrial mass, the vital etheric rays have become visible at intervals. Later, these rays became more numerous and are now beginning to interfere with our electrical activities, particularly telegraphy, whose service is sometimes completely disrupted by these radiant currents. Interestingly, these disturbances only affect wires running east and west. The spiritual forces of the Earth. The rays or lines of force of the group spirits of plants radiate in all directions from the center of the Earth outward, passing through the roots of plants and trees and then rising toward their tops. On the other hand, the currents of the group spirits of animals surround the Earth. The relatively weak and invisible currents generated by plant spirits and the powerful rays of force generated by the Christ Spirit, now visible as the aurora borealis, have so far been of the same nature as static electricity. Meanwhile, the currents generated by the animal group spirits, which encircle the Earth, can be compared to dynamic electricity, which once gave the Earth its power of movement in past ages. Now, however, the Christic currents are becoming increasingly powerful, and their static electricity is being released. The etheric impulse they provide will inaugurate a new era, and humanity's sensory organs must adapt to this change. Instead of etheric rays emanating from an object and producing a reflected image on our retinas, the so-called blind spot will become sensitized. We will look through the eye and see directly the thing itself, rather than its image on our retina. At that point, we will not only see the surface of what we observe, but will also be able to see through it, as those who have developed etheric vision can already do. As time passes and Christ, through his benevolent ministration, draws more and more interplanetary ether to Earth, thus making its vital body more luminous, we will be walking in a sea of light. When we learn to abandon our selfish and self-centered ways through constant contact with these benevolent Christic vibrations, we too will become luminous beings. Then the eye, as it is currently constituted, would no longer serve us, which is why it is now beginning to change, and we are experiencing the discomfort inherent in all reconstruction. The Selçuk has verified, by examining a number of people in normal health, that each of the prismatic atoms composing the lower ethers radiates from itself lines of force that rotate the physical atom in which it is embedded, sustaining the entire living body. The combined tendency of all these units of force is toward the periphery of the body, where they form what has been called the optic fluid, also known by other names. When the air pressure from the outside is reduced due to residence at high altitudes, a tendency toward nervousness manifests because the etheric force from within rushes outward without control. If a person were not capable of partially closing the exit of solar energy through an effort of will to overcome the difficulty, no one could live in such a place. We have heard of war neurosis and know that many people who did not have the slightest physical injury were found dead on the battlefield. In fact, we have seen and spoken with individuals who had fainted in this manner but did not know why they had died. All of them denied feeling fear and unanimously stated that they had suddenly lost consciousness and a moment later found themselves in their current state. Unlike their fallen companions, they did not have a single scratch on their bodies. Our preconceived idea that it must have been a momentary fear caused by a particularly close call, though not realized, prevented a thorough investigation. However, the verified results of the consequences of a fall led us to believe that something similar could occur in this context. This hypothesis was confirmed one night some time ago while I was traveling to a distant land on a mission. I heard a scream. Although the human voice can only be heard through the air, there are nuances that can be perceived in the spiritual realms at distances greater than those reached by wireless messages. The scream was close, however, and I was on the scene in an instant, but not soon enough to provide the necessary help. I found a man sliding down a steep embankment devoid of vegetation, about 30 meters wide, which, upon later examination, proved to be nearly smooth and without a single crevice where he could grip with his fingers. To save him, it would have been necessary to materialize both hands and shoulders, but there was no time. In a moment, he had slipped over the precipice and was falling to the canyon floor, probably thousands of meters below. Driven by a natural spirit of companionship, I followed him, and along the way I observed the phenomenon that forms the basis of this article. When the body had reached considerable speed, the ethers composing the vital body began to separate. When the body crashed against the rocks below and was shattered, very little ether remained, if any at all. However, little by little the ethers reassembled, took shape, and fluttered above the mangled corpse along with the finer vehicles. But the man was in a state of stupor, incapable of perceiving or realizing his altered condition. Seeing that he could not be helped, I continued on my way. Upon reflecting on the matter, I realized that something unusual had happened, and that it was my duty to find out whether the ethers exited in this manner in all cases of falling, and if so, why. In the past, such research would have been difficult, but with the advent of flying machines, many victims were available for study. It became easy to verify that when a falling body reaches a certain speed, the higher ethers leave the dense body, rendering the falling person unconscious. When the body reaches the ground, it is shattered. However, the unfortunate individual may regain consciousness once the ether has reorganized, at which point they begin to suffer the physical consequences of the fall. If the fall continues after the higher ethers have departed, the increasing speed displaces the lower ethers, leaving only the silver cord attached to the body. This cord breaks upon impact with the ground, and the seed atom moves to the rupture point, where it is retained in the usual manner. From these findings, we conclude that it is the normal air pressure that keeps the vital body within the dense body. When we move at an abnormal speed, the pressure pulls away from some parts of the body, creating a partial vacuum, which causes the ethers to exit and flow into this vacuum. The two higher ethers, which are more loosely attached, are the first to disappear, leaving the person unconscious after having produced the life panorama in an instant. Then, if the fall continues to increase air pressure in front of the body and creates a vacuum behind it, the more tightly bound lower ethers are also forced out, and the body is dead before it reaches the ground. When a large projectile moves through the air, it creates a vacuum behind it due to its enormous speed. If a person happens to be within this vacuum zone as the projectile passes, they suffer to some degree depending on their nature and proximity to the center of suction. Their situation is essentially the reverse of that of a falling person, for they remain still while a moving body removes air pressure, allowing the ethers to escape. If the amount of displaced ether is relatively small and consists only of the third and fourth ethers, which govern sensory perception and memory, they will likely suffer only a temporary loss of memory and an inability to feel or move. This incapacity will disappear when the extracted ethers reintegrate into the dense body, an achievement much more difficult than when the physical body perishes and reorganization occurs independently of that vehicle. Sclerosis or hardening of the arteries. Our body gradually hardens from infancy to old age due to the calcareous substances contained in most of the foods we consume. This calcareous matter is primarily deposited in the walls of the arteries and veins, leading to what the medical profession calls arteriosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries. A child's arteries are extremely soft and elastic, like a rubber tube. However, as we progress through childhood, youth, and old age, the walls of the arteries harden due to the chalky deposits left behind by the passing blood. Over time, they can become as rigid and inflexible as the stem of a pipe. There is even a condition called pipe stem artery, in which the arteries become so brittle that they may rupture, causing hemorrhages and death. That is why it is often said that a man is as old as his arteries. If we can cleanse the arteries and capillaries of this earthy matter, we can gradually prolong the life and usefulness of our body. From an occult perspective, of course, it does not matter whether we live or die, as the saying goes, for death does not mean annihilation, but merely a shift in consciousness to other realms. However, once we have carried a vehicle through the helpless years of childhood, endured the passionate years of youth, and reached the age of discretion where we truly begin to gain experience, the longer we can extend this period of learning, the more we can gain. For this reason, prolonging the life of the body has some value. To achieve this, we must first select foods that are less impregnated with the suffocating substances that cause the hardening of the arteries and capillaries. Secondly, we must try to eliminate the suffocating matter we have already absorbed, if possible. However, science has yet to discover a food or medicine that reliably produces this effect. It has been proven that electric baths are highly beneficial, though not entirely satisfactory. The best agent for eradicating this earthy substance is whey, followed by grape juice. If consumed continuously and in generous quantities, these substances will significantly improve the hardened condition of the arteries. Chapter 3. Heredity and Disease. Unfortunately, people tend to attribute their flaws to heredity, blaming their parents for their defects while taking full credit for their virtues. The mere act of distinguishing between what is inherited and what is one's own demonstrates that human nature has two aspects, the aspect of form and the aspect of life. We are drawn to certain people by the law of causation and the law of association, the same law that makes musicians seek the company of other musicians in concert halls, gamblers congregate at racetracks or billiard halls, and scholars gather in libraries. This same law also causes individuals with similar tendencies, characteristics, and tastes to be born into the same family. When we hear someone say, "Oh yes, I know I'm extravagant, but I can't help it. It runs in the family," this is the law of association at work. The sooner we recognize that, instead of using heredity as an excuse for our bad habits, we should strive to overcome them and cultivate virtues instead, the better off we will be. Man is essentially spirit, well equipped with a mental and moral nature that is entirely his own, taking from his parents only the material for the physical body. Thus, heredity is only relevant in the formation of the dense body, and does not apply to the qualities of the soul, which are entirely individual. The incoming ego also performs a certain work on its dense body, incorporating into it the quintessence of its past physical qualities. No body is an exact blend of the parents' qualities, although the ego is limited to using the materials obtained from the father's and mother's bodies. However, the ego exerts some control over the arrangement of these materials. In the fetus, in the lower part of the throat, just above the sternum or breastbone, there is a gland called the thymus, which is larger during gestation and gradually atrophies as the child grows, disappearing entirely before the age of 14. The scientific community has been perplexed by the function of this gland and has proposed various theories to explain it. One of these theories is that it supplies the material for the production of red blood cells until the child's bones are sufficiently developed to generate their own. This theory is correct. During the early years, the ego possessing the child's body is not in full control, which is why we recognize that young children are not fully responsible for their actions. In fact, legal responsibility is not assigned before the age of 7, and in some cases, it has been extended to 10 years of age. During this period, the child is not legally accountable for their actions, and rightly so, because the ego, which operates in the blood, can only function properly in the blood of its own creation. So when, As in the body of a child, the blood reserve is provided by the parents through the thymus gland, the child is still not their own master. This is why children do not refer to themselves as I in the early years, but instead identify with the family. They are daddy's girl or mummy's boy. The child will say, Maria wants this or Juanito wants that. But as soon as they reach puberty and begin to produce their own blood cells, we hear the child say, I will do this or I will do that. From that moment on, they start asserting their own identity and distancing themselves from the family. Thus, seeing that blood, like the body, is inherited from the parents, tendencies toward illness are also inherited. Not the illness itself, but the tendency. After the age of 7, when the resident ego begins to produce its own blood cells, it largely depends on itself whether these tendencies manifest as actual diseases in life. Chapter 4. Effects of Alcohol and Tobacco. Meat and alcohol tend to make a man fierce and draw his spiritual sight away from the higher worlds, focusing it on the material plane. That is why the Bible tells us that at the beginning of the age of the rainbow, the age in which we live, in an atmosphere of clear and pure air so different from the misty atmospheric condition of Atlantis mentioned in the 2nd chapter of Genesis, Noah first made wine. Material development has occurred as a result of our current concentration of energies in the material world, which resulted from participation in meat and wine. The first miracle of Christ turned water into wine. He had received the universal spirit in baptism and had no need for artificial stimulants. He changed the water into wine to give it to others who were less advanced. But no wine drinker can inherit the kingdom of God. The esoteric reason for this is that, while the lower ethers vibrate with the atoms of the seed in the solar plexus and the heart, thus keeping the physical body alive, the higher ethers vibrate with the pituitary body and the pineal gland. By imbibing this false rebellious spirit that ferments outside the body and is different from the spirit that ferments inside by sugar, these organs are temporarily stunned and cannot vibrate with the higher world. As a result, due to the abuse of age, man ceases to function in the higher worlds if he consumes too much of this spirit, alcohol. The organs named may awaken slightly, allowing him to see the lower realms of the world of desire and all the bad things within it, which occurs in the condition known as delirium tremens. In summary, since the evolution of the soul depends on the acquisition of the 2 higher ethers that make up the beautiful bridal gown, and since these ethers are attuned to the named organs in the same way the lower ethers are attuned to the seed atom in the heart and the seed atom in the solar plexus, you will easily understand the deadly effects of alcohol and drugs on the spiritual man. To clarify further, I will cite an incident from life. There is an old saying, once a Mason, always a Mason. This means that when someone has received initiation into the Masonic order, and by virtue of it becomes a Mason, they cannot renounce it because they cannot renounce the knowledge and secrets they have learned. Similarly, a person who goes to university may return their learning from that institution, but once a Mason, always a Mason. Likewise, once a student and brother of a mystery school, always a student and brother of that same mystery school. But while this is true, life after life, we return connected with the same order we have been affiliated with in past lives. We can conduct ourselves in such a way that it becomes impossible for us to recognize this in our physical brains. I will cite an example, which is very significant, for the benefit of all students. When I entered the temple of the Rosicrucian order in Germany, I was surprised to see a man I had known on the Pacific coast. I had seen him a few times, but we had never spoken. At that time, he seemed to be in a position in society that was much higher than mine, and I had never had a personal relationship with him. However, he greeted me warmly and seemed to understand everything about the society, our meeting there, etc. I eagerly anticipated my return to America to gather more information from this brother when I had the luck of encountering him here in the West. When I arrived in the city where he was, some mutual friends told me he had been waiting for me and was eager to meet me. Therefore, when I met the gentleman, I immediately approached him and shook his hand. He also seemed to recognize me and called me by my name. Everything indicated that he knew everything that had happened while we were both out of the body. Moreover, he had told me in the temple that he remembered everything that had happened to him when he was out of the body. I, of course, believed him, as he was of a much higher degree than the first degree I had just been initiated into. On the day of our physical meeting, after a few moments of conversation, I said something that made him look at me intently. I had referred to an incident of our meeting in the temple, and he clearly showed that he knew nothing about it. However, I had said so much that I felt forced to say more or risk looking very foolish. So I said that he had professed to remember everything. He denied it, and at the end of the conversation he begged me to find out why he was a lay brother of the Rosicrucian order and could not remember what had happened during his absence from the body. As I later learned from him, outside the body he smoked cigarettes and consumed drugs, which clouded his brain to such an extent that he could not transmit any of his psychic experiences. When I told him that in the body he made a brave effort to rid himself of the habit, he acknowledged it. This case illustrates the care we must take to maintain cleanliness in our habits in all things, to consider this body of ours as the temple of God, and to refrain from profaning it, just as we would refrain from profaning a house of God made of stone and mortar, which is not even a fraction as holy as the body we have been endowed with. The brain, in particular, is the great and important instrument through which we accomplish our work in the physical world, and obviously, we must not use any intoxicants or drugs that cloud it and thus prevent us from making the progress we hope for. Final reflection towards a comprehensive understanding of disease and health. As we close this text, we face an inescapable reality. Disease is not an isolated phenomenon, nor a random event, but the result of a complex web of physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual factors. We have explored the hidden causes of disease, the influence of inheritance, the effects of alcohol and tobacco, and the interconnectedness between karma, genetics, and consciousness. What we have uncovered compels us to question traditional medical paradigms, but above all, it demands that we rethink our relationship with the body and health from a deeper, more holistic perspective. The esoteric tradition has always viewed the body as a reflection of the inner state of being, a manifestation of invisible forces acting beyond the purely biological. In this sense, disease is a manifestation in the physical plane of a pre-existing disharmony in more subtle levels of existence. But this view, which has been defended in Gnostic, alchemical, and theosophical texts, should not be interpreted in a reductive or deterministic manner. It is not about blaming the individual for their illness, but understanding that their state of health is a consequence of a broader balance in which both internal and external factors play a role. Theosophy and esoteric knowledge have maintained for centuries that the human being is more than a biological organism. It is a multidimensional system composed of different levels of consciousness that interact with each other. In this context, health is not merely the absence of disease, but a state of harmony between matter, mind, and spirit. Disease as a tool for evolution. One of the fundamental principles of the esoteric tradition is that disease is not a punishment, but a teaching mechanism. Physical suffering, from this perspective, is not a mistake of nature nor a whim of destiny, but an opportunity for introspection and transformation. The alchemist Paracelsus, the physician, stated, "The doctor who does not know the soul of the sick person will not be able to cure their body." This statement, which might be considered heretical by conventional medicine today, reminds us that the healing process cannot be limited to the physical plane. It is not enough to eradicate symptoms. It is necessary to understand the root of the disease, its deep causes, and the meaning it holds. In this sense, we have examined how karma influences health, showing that disease does not only respond to genetic or environmental factors, but also to accumulated imbalances from the past. But far from being a fatalistic view, this understanding gives us a tool of power. If our past actions have shaped our present reality, then our present actions can transform our future. Inheritance and free will beyond biology. The study of inheritance and disease has allowed us to question one of the most deeply rooted beliefs in modern biology, the idea that our genes determine our health absolutely. Conventional genetics tells us that certain diseases are inevitable because they are encoded in our DNA. However, theosophy and modern epigenetics offer a different view. Epigenetics, one of the most revolutionary branches of current science, has shown that our genes are not an immutable destiny, but respond to environmental, emotional, and lifestyle factors. This is strikingly similar to what mystical traditions have taught for centuries. The energy we inherit from our ancestors is not just genetic but vibrational. Inherited diseases can be modified through changes in consciousness and the transmutation of habits. The human being is not a victim of its biology, but a creator of its destiny. While modern science has been slow to recognize this reality, esoteric texts had already proposed that the body responds to the vibration of thought and emotion, and that lifestyle habits have a direct impact on genetic expression. Alcohol and tobacco beyond the physical body. One of the most impactful sections of this text has been the analysis of alcohol and tobacco, not only from the perspective of physical health, but also from the impact they have on consciousness and the subtle bodies. In the mystical tradition, the human body is considered a sacred temple, a vehicle for the expansion of the spirit in matter. The consumption of substances that alter the state of consciousness has been seen as an obstacle to the evolution of the soul, as it affects the energetic vibration of the human being and weakens its connection to the transcendental. Scientific research has shown that alcohol affects neurological function, decreases memory capacity, and alters the perception of reality. But beyond biochemistry, esoteric texts warn that alcohol and other substances alter the connection between the physical body and the etheric body, facilitating the entry of negative external influences. The Zohar, one of the fundamental texts of Kabbalah, mentions that whoever sows to their flesh weakens their soul and opens the doors to darkness. This view aligns with the teachings of various initiatory traditions that have forbidden the consumption of certain substances by their disciples, not out of mere moral rigor, but because they knew that these elements interfere with the human being's ability to perceive higher realities. Although modern society has normalized the consumption of these substances, it is essential that the spiritual seeker understands their real impact, not only on the body, but on consciousness. This text has led us to explore some of the deepest secrets about health and disease, revealing that healing is not just a chemical process, but an alignment with the universal laws of harmony and balance. But beyond theory, this text leaves us with a responsibility. What will we do with this knowledge? Will we continue to see disease as an external event, or will we start to understand it as an opportunity for evolution? Will we take control of our health or continue to delegate our responsibility to medical systems that only treat symptoms without addressing the deep causes? Will we continue to intoxicate our bodies and minds, or will we choose the path of purification and consciousness? The knowledge has been revealed to us, and now it depends on each one of us to apply it, transform it into wisdom, and allow this understanding to guide us toward a life of greater balance, health, and fulfillment. For disease is merely a teacher, and health is the natural destiny of one who has learned the lesson. Thus this text concludes, but the journey toward true healing is just beginning. We are at the threshold of the next exploration of the hidden mysteries of existence.